Good morning, everyone. My name is John Geib. I'm a Master Gardener. I've been a Master Gardener for about 8 years. Got my training for Master Gardeners over in Midland. And we pretty much proved that if you can grow anything in Midland, you can grow anywhere. Because it's worse than here. So we're going to be talking about turf basics today. Going to be covering a bunch of different stuff. First thing we're going to talk about, though, is going to be selection. The grass that we actually grow here is kind of important. Hold on. Wrong switch. There we go. Also going to talk about watering because, we don't really get a lot of water around here, so we need to know when and how to water. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the upkeep and maintenance that you're going to need to do on your lawn and kind of discuss some problems and issues that you might run into. And if you have any questions and anything, especially about that, you can go ahead and ask those when we get there. Okay. We do live in a semi-desert. We get about 24 inches of rainfall. And we usually don't want to be here the 3 or 4 days a year that we do get the rain. So, we do get rain. When we do get it, it's usually in very heavy amounts, a couple inches at a time, usually in, half-hour increments when thunderstorms roll through. And then we'll hit long periods where we don't get a lot of rain. If you look at the rainfall totals from last year, last rainfall event we really had was in July, and then we had a 2-day event in October, and then we had the snows in January. So we were going, 3 months between rainfalls. So it's very hard on the landscape. So if you want to try and keep it up, you got to make sure you plant the right plants that are used to dealing with that sort of a weather pattern. Okay. Next thing to think about is we're in what's called the USDA Climate Zone 8B. The climate zones only are for perennial plants, which most grasses are considered a perennial. So these lets us know how cold it's going to get over the winter. 8B says we're going to probably drop at the lowest average temperature somewhere in the low teens. 10 to 15 degrees is what it's calling for. But that can vary, just depend on your location. If you're top of a hill, you can get a couple degrees cooler usually. South side of a mountain, one of the mountains, you might stay a little warmer. So that's kind of a local, immediate local vicinity that might shift your zone a little bit. But we're pretty much in a zone 8B or 8A. But last year proved that we will go to zone 7B every once in a while when we get the really cold temperatures. So something to think about when we're doing that. As for heat, everybody knows it's Texas. We get hot in the summer. So it's not a big problem. Cities are usually built by subdivision at a time. So if you look at the map of Abilene, you can almost picture out where a lot of the subdivisions were built as the city grew. Right now we're looking out, towards Potosi and Buffalo Gap, and you're getting all these new subdivisions built, and they're going to look kind of like we have up here on the upper picture, a house and a plot of grass. Not much else in it. Now, if you go into town, some of the older sections, it's a plot of grass with a house and one tree that's grown up over the last 20 to 40 years. That's how the subdivisions are usually built. Very minimal landscaping for the contractors. They don't want to put all the money into the landscape because you never know what the homeowner is going to actually want. But they do plant at least one tree usually in the front yard. So this is where we're usually starting from on most landscapes. If you're out in the city, or outside of the city in the country area, usually it's same thing but a lot more grass on it, and maybe a few more trees, usually mesquite. So this is what we'll start with. So we're looking at average lot size in Abilene's running at about 65 by 125. Gives us about 8,300 square feet of space on the lot. If you take away all of the things that we aren't worried about for landscaping, the house, driveways, sidewalks, that sort of stuff, we end up with about 5,000 square feet of landscape that we need to think of how we're going to be dealing with it. And like I said, most of the home builders, when they build us a nice big flat green yard. And that's what we have to work with. But we have to think of it, okay, what are we going to actually use that yard for? Do we have kids? How old are the kids? You know, are we dealing with kids that are in soccer and baseball or football where they need a nice big playing field to practice on? Is it little kids where they might want a jungle gym or a trampoline or something like that? This will all kind of affect what we're going to be doing with this landscape. Do we have pets? Dogs can be very destructive to the edges of your yard. One, they dig holes. Two, on the edges, especially if you've got a fence that they borders something that they might see on the other side of the fence, you'll get that strip where they've just walked out all of the grass and you end up with a bare spot all the way around. Also, you usually don't want to mix the spots where your pets are going taking care of business and your kids playing football. That's usually leads to bad things, at least for the kids. Social activities. Do you throw lots of parties and barbecues? Are we going to be needing an area where we can do something like a nice big barbecue pit, deck, pools, that sort of thing? All of these will have to take into effect while we're looking at our landscape. So, do you need your football field? Or are you going to end up with the average household that we have here in Abilene? This is a typical middle of Abilene type street. As you can see, lots of grass and your one contractor planted tree. After about 20 years, that's what it's going to look like. So it looks a little boring. So now think about it. When we're talking about what we're going to be using it for, most of our back activities that we do in the yard, barbecues, playing with the kids and stuff like that, that's usually in the backyard, right? You know, very little of it's in the front yard. Front yard is kind of more of a display area. So all you have to do is just take a little bit of your yard out, plant some plants, and you turn that area into a much prettier area, and it definitely sets you apart from the rest of the neighborhood. Also, this takes up a lot less water than the grass that we're talking about planting today. So, something to think about. If you don't have kids and you may just be, nice little place for yourself, maybe do something like this. Nice little quiet area where you might have a little water feature in there so you can kind of go and relax. So, these types of things take up a lot less water than a lawn. As you can tell, I'm not much of a lawn fan. But I do understand a lot of people do need it or want it. So when we're looking at the selection process, we need to think about what we're using it for. Is it going to get a lot of foot traffic? Is it going to get traffic where we're going to have pets and things like that? How much shade do we have going on in the yard? So things of this nature. Now, as master gardeners, we recommend 4 varieties of grasses here. And all 4 of these are warm season grasses. We do not recommend any cool season grasses around here. Cool season grasses grow mostly in the spring and the fall. As you know, we don't really have a whole lot of spring and fall around here. And then the summer is so hot, it will almost bake out most of the cool season grasses to the point where they won't grow without ridiculous amounts of water to keep them just alive, let alone, thriving. Bermuda grass. Didn't show up as well as it's supposed to. Bermuda grass, there's a reason that it's listed as a weed on most herbicide canisters. It grows. If you give it a little bit of water, it will grow. Get a lot of water, it will grow a lot. But it is extremely drought tolerant and does very well around here. If it goes for several months at a time without any water, it does kind of go dormant, yellows out like it does in the winter. But as soon as you throw a little bit of water on it, it'll perk right back up and regrow into a nice green lawn. It is sun-loving. It will not grow under trees. If you have a large tree in your yard, that area will not be able to grow Bermuda grass, unfortunately. You'll get a little bit around the edges, but anything close up that gets a fair amount of shade during the day, it will not work. It's about 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight is what we're looking at needing for Bermuda grass to grow well. It is a thin-bladed grass. There's a lot of people like thin-bladed grass. Some like thick-bladed. It's personal preference. Bermuda works well for those that like thin-bladed grasses. Usually cutting depth, we're looking at 1.5 to 3.5 inches in height. The higher you can leave it from cut it, the longer you can go between waterings, because that little bit of extra growth will shade the ground quite nicely, so you don't have to worry about watering it a little bit. It kind of keeps the moisture in the ground. And we're still looking, though, if you really want a good, healthy, growing lawn, inch, 3/4 of an inch to an inch of rainfall a week is what it needs. Now, this is either rainfall naturally or from us, actually watering the yard. The one thing that you will notice that if you do get more than about an inch a week, you're going to be mowing probably twice a week, because it will be able to grow that fast. Last year, I've got a lot of Bermuda in my yard, and I was mowing twice a week during the rainy season last year. And so it's grows well with water. So none of those showed up. That's not... I'm supposed to have little white blocks around all of them. So buffalo grass is actually one of the few native grasses that we have around here that actually grows well for a lawn. It is extremely drought tolerant. Because it is a native grass, it has a natural tendency to grow very deep roots to gather water. It is also a sun-loving plant grass. So we're looking at 6 to 8 inches of rainfall or sunlight to get it to grow well. Can handle a little bit of dapple shade, but very little on that. Also warm season grass, like I said. Mowing height is about 2.5 to 4 inches. Or you can leave it, if you've got like a larger lot where you have some areas that you don't really want to take care of a whole lot, buffalo grass works real well. It grows about 6 inches, and that's it. And it actually looks pretty decent. From a distance, it looks really nice unmowed. If you've got like a larger lot, you can kind of stick it off in the backside and use it. Man, this does not work well. Looking at about 3/4 of an inch of rainfall for the watering situation. So, okay, St. Augustine grass. This is the other one that everybody seems to love besides Bermuda grass for their lawns. It is a thick-bladed grass. We call it shade tolerant. That is a little bit of shade. It will not grow under a thick canopy of trees. Sorry. It still needs about 4 to 6 inches of sun a day if it's going to go ahead and grow. Anything less than that, and it's going to yellow out quite a bit, and you're going to have a real hard time keeping it growing. But it's kind of a balancing act. Do you want trees or do you want grass? One of the things you can do under trees that, if you have a lot of thick trees, you can either plant a lot of shade-loving plants into there instead of grass and mulch the area to kind of keep it looking nice. That's about all you can do under a heavy shade canopy. Mow height on the St. Augustine is about 2.5 to 3.5 inches usually. And we're usually mowing about once a week on that. So it's going to need about 1.25 inches of rain a week to keep it going. It is a little bit more water thirsty than the rest of us are looking at, the rest of the grasses that I'm talking about. The one thing that St. Augustine does have, it is prone to fungal issues. There are a couple of fungal problems that it will run into, especially if it's kept damp. If you water at the wrong time and it stays damp for too long, it will get fungal problems. And there are some fungal problems that are more of they aren't really fungal, I think they're viral. And it will actually sterilize the soil for St. Augustine grass. So once some of these pathogens come in, you either have to remove the ground to get it in, or there are some treatments to actually kill off some of it. But it's not an easy thing to do. At that point, it's almost easier just to switch over to Bermuda grass or something else. Zoysia grass. Zoysia grass was actually designed to be planted on golf courses because everybody wants an area that has high traffic. It's a grass that can take high traffic, either in golf carts and people walking on it. People abusing it with golf clubs and having to replace the divots. So it's a very hardy grass. It's used to being mowed at various heights as low as 1/4 of an inch if we're talking about greens and tees for the golf courses. But it's also reasonably drought tolerant. It's not super drought tolerant, but it is pretty drought tolerant. but it works really well for this area. There are two different varieties. There's two main species of zoysia grass. You've got Zoysia japonica and Zoysia madeira. The japonica is the thin-bladed variety or species, and there's multiple varieties in that. And then the japonica is the wide-bladed grass. The madeira is the thin-bladed grass. So you can get both thin or thick-bladed varieties. Each variety has got its own little characteristics that work well. So you have to kind of do a little bit of research into that if you want to go with a zoysia. Like I said, usually when you cut zoysia, it's about 1.5 to 3 inches. But you can cut it really low if you want, but it's going to take a lot more water if you cut it real low. Lost my train of thought for a second on what I was going to say. Rainfalls, like I said, about 1 inch a week if we're getting a nice, good, healthy thing. One of the big main drawbacks to zoysia, it is expensive. It cannot be seeded. It has to be either put in plugs or sod. This is what a plugged yard will look like when you first plug it. It's usually anywhere from a 1 to 3 inch plug of grass that you just go in and plant it. And you kind of spread it out. The idea is that you can cover a much larger area for a lot less price. The problem is you've got a lot of bare dirt. You're going to end up with a lot of weeds in that grass until the grass finally takes over, and it will probably be about 1.5 years before that plugged lawn actually fills in to be a full grass. We used to have the variety Xenon zoysia when I lived in San Antonio. Loved it. It was a thin-bladed variety. It was some of the best grass I'd ever seen and walked on. I used to walk around bare feet on it because it was that beautiful of a carpet. It would completely block out all weeds into the grass. I never had to worry about weeds at all. The grass was so thick after the first year, I never had to worry about weeds. It was great, but it was expensive. At the time we installed it, we had a set budget for our yard. We knew we were going to be a little expensive on it, but we set our budget. At the time, St. Augustine was running about $65 a pallet. Bermuda was running $70 or $75. The zoysia ran $150 a pallet. So it was expensive up front. But I rarely watered it. I rarely mowed it. Realistically, I mowed it about every other week, maybe every third week, depending on how much rainfall we got. And then, like I said, I never had to worry about weeds. So it's a very nice grass, but it's a very expensive upfront investment. But it's kind of where you want to put your money: long-term maintenance on the lawn, or upfront with the actual sod. So, watering our lawn. How much are we going to need to water those lawns? Well, I went through and I talked about it and mentioned roughly how much we're going to need. It's going to depend on your variety that you plant. But it's usually anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches per week. But that will also depend on weather. Did we have any rainfall that week? Well, that rainfall gets taken away from anything that we have to add for actual water onto the lawn. Is it a hot, dry week? Are we having red flag conditions where we've got 10% moisture and 30-mile-an-hour winds drying out the soil? Well, we may have to go ahead and water a little bit extra that week because we've lost so much moisture. Is the yard got a lot of shade on it? Dappled shade or whatnot. That might help ease off on a little bit of how much we have to water. But like I said, anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches, roughly 1 inch a week. We'll say the inch a week is what we're going to base everything on. Now, same lawn, same grass, same maintenance schedule on everything. The only difference is this one, which is a little bit yellower, although it doesn't show up real well on this picture, on this viewer, versus this, which is nice, big, nice, pretty, thick, lush green yard. Only difference is one's watered, one's not. Okay, this is looks like it's a Bermuda. This one, if you, like I said, this cameras or the projector is not showing it real well, is a little bit of a yellower tint to it because it hasn't probably been seen any water for about 3 weeks. But otherwise, it's about the same. So it's, do you want to water it or not? So, and here's why you may not want to. Okay, our 5,000 square foot of yard. If we're looking at about 1 inch of rainfall a week to water that lawn, that's about 0.6 gallons of water per square foot. That's roughly 3,000 gallons of water per week, 13,000 gallons of water that your grass is going to need to grow efficiently per month. Then comes the fun part. How are we watering it? Do you have a sprinkler system installed? Are you running pop-up sprinkler heads? If you run the pop-up sprinkler heads, the standards, as you notice, it's a very fine mist that it puts out. That fine mist has a very bad habit of evaporating before it hits the ground. Pop-up sprinkler heads like that run about 50% water efficiency. So that 13,000 gallons of water that you need for your grass to grow, you need to put 26,000 gallons of water out through your pop-up sprinkler heads to get that lawn to grow nicely. Okay? Now, that can be adjusted a little bit. For a couple dollars a head extra, you can go ahead and put in the rotary style pop-up sprinkler heads. Those will pop up and they'll just run like a small sprinkler spray as it goes across. The droplets are much larger. They aren't that fine mist. Puts out the same amount of water, but it's because it's the bigger droplet size, not nearly as much evaporation. They're about 75% efficient. So, a lot better, but we can always do better. The other things we can do is things like manual sprinklers. Now I put these as like the big fan sprinklers, the ones that run overhead like this, come out, hook it up to the hose and it just kind of runs the big fan of water. Those work. The little tractors that you can run that run along the hose to water the area, those all work. Those can be anywhere from about 60 to about 85% efficient on water efficiency. So it's better sometimes. The ones that spray up are the ones that don't work, have a lot more water evaporation. So the other problem with those a lot of times is that you're not spraying it on the grass. You'll end up spraying on the sidewalk, the house, the road. So you get a little bit of lack of efficiency there. The other thing is by hand. Now if you're sitting there walking around your yard with a wand watering your yard, that's going to be the best way to do it if you're going to do hand watering. Most people don't have that time. They'll pop it off, throw the hose out in the middle of the yard, turn the water on and let it run for a while. Yeah, most of the water though runs to the low spot in the yard so that the higher spots of the yard don't get any water, the lower spots get soaked. Oh, and then you've got a phone call, so you went inside to go and listen, talk on the phone, forgot about your water, and now you're watering, 6 blocks down the street. So if you're going to hand water, that's great. But keep an eye on it when you're doing it. Best way to do it, believe it or not, is drip irrigation. You can actually drip irrigate your lawn. Best time to do it is if you've got a bare ground and you're going to be throwing some sod in. You can put your drip irrigation in right underneath your sod, lay the sod right on top of it, 100% water efficiency. So it's the best way to do it if you can do it. If you've already got an existing lawn and want to switch over to drip, you can do it. Best way to do it would be to score the grass and kind of bury the drip line as deep as you can into the ground, under the thatch layer of your grass. And then, just make sure you stake it in so it doesn't get picked up by the lawnmowers. And then in about 2 years, you'll never be able to find your drip irrigation system because it'll be completely buried under the grass. So, another key thing to think about when we're dealing with water is when we're going to water. Evenings will work. Mornings are the best time, though. Usually, 5, 6 in the morning, gets all the water out onto the lawn. There's very little winds usually that time of day, so you're not getting stuff blowing off of your yard into the sidewalks and driveways. Also, once, the water has a chance also because it's the coolest part of the day. so there's less evaporation when it's actually going out of your sprinklers. But once it gets onto the grass, it drips down, and then the sun will come out and evaporate off what little is there, so you don't get any fungal issues. If you're doing it in the evening, you're going to want to try and do that early enough, as late as you can, but early enough so that any water that's still on the grass has time to dry off before it starts getting cool over the evening. Because if you get a cool, wet environment, that's when the fungal issues really start to take effect on your lawn. And when we're talking about watering, we're looking at usually, at most, once per week. Okay? We want to do a long, deep, thorough soaking of the lawn once per week. And the reason we want to do that is if you do that, the moisture will slowly seep down into the soil, and the roots will naturally grow to follow the moisture levels. So once you get it, the moisture level 6-8 inches down, the roots are down there. They're a lot less. They're a lot more drought tolerant because they can pick up the moisture that's really deep in the soil. If you're watering every day, every other day, your roots never grow more than about an inch or so below the ground level, and so that top layer of dirt has a tendency to dry out very quickly. So if the roots aren't down there, the droughts are going to really hurt your lawn. So, key thing, make sure you're watering your actual grass. If you're doing any sort of pop-up sprinklers or hand watering anything, no matter how much you water concrete, it will not grow. Okay? So, if you do have a sprinkler system, learn to use the control on it to set the times so you can time it so it works well. For early mornings, that sort of thing. Run the sprinklers for the correct amount of time. Those are always the key things to learn how to do. But if you do have a sprinkler system and it's set to run middle of the, early morning when you're not up, you need to go out and test your sprinkler system, just a couple of minutes on each system to make sure you don't have any any heads that have popped loose, any leaks, that sort of stuff. So to kind of keep an eye on that. Maintenance. Maintenance involves on grass, mowing, fertilization, and then handling of weeds. So when we're talking about mowing, it depends on the grass that we were species that we were talking about. We went through and kind of highlighted those on the slides. But we're usually looking at a 2 to 3 inch mow height is really a good height. The higher you can mow it, the better. Like I said, it shades the ground a little bit so you don't get quite so much evaporation. The grass won't need quite so much moisture. Don't mow when it's wet. If you mow when it's wet, you have a tendency to tear the grass blades, which damages them. The tips of them is a little harder for them to grow back. Also, you have a tendency to clog up your mower, and that bogs down the mower, which means you can't quite cut the grass nice and fine. Keep your mower blade nice and sharp. It doesn't have to be so sharp that it cuts your finger, but it's better if you have a blade that will actually cut grass as opposed to tear it. So, mulch your grass clippings. Unless you've got a lot of weeds that have gone to seed, don't bag your grass clippings. Your grass clippings are effectively a natural fertilizer for your lawn. So, this is also the reason to mow at the appropriate times as often as needed. Because if you cut too much grass at one time, it kind of leaves too heavy of a mulch clippings, onto the grass and kind of smothers the grass a bit. Also, if you take off more than about half of the grass blade at a time, the grass becomes yellow because most of the photosynthesis happens in that top, half of the blade. So if you mow more than half of your grass, you'll notice your grass looks very yellow for a couple of days because it's having a hard time, getting some sunlight to it. I was talking about buffalo grass, that you can leave it unmowed and whatnot. This picture is a picture of buffalo grass, mowed and unmowed. So, like I said, it looks a little clumpy and not real pretty up close if you're looking at it. But if you're looking at like a back section of a yard, unmowed buffalo grass looks really good. And you basically don't have to do anything to it. Don't mow it, don't water it. Don't worry about maybe some weed control, but that's about it. Fertilization. Key thing on fertilization is fertilize when the grass is growing. It doesn't need it when it's dormant. It's better if you can use a slow release type fertilizer. The fertilization that you do need to do, though, does need to be done preferably on a, where did I leave it? Okay, there it is. On a soil sample. We do have a few soil sample bags back there if you need to pick up one. These are for the A&M laboratory. What you will need to do is go online and get a sheet to fill out to actually put in the mail with your soil sample bag. It has all the directions on how to take a soil sample, where to send it, and all the costs and everything like that. The reason we don't keep these is they change this sheet reasonably regularly, so it's always best to download the newest version online. But once you, if you do soil sample through like A&M or any of the labs, they will give you a very good recommendation on how much fertilizer you need for whatever the use is. This could be anything from vegetable gardens to plants to the middle of your lawn. So they'll let you know what you need and what you don't need. Now, we are talking grass. One of the key things that grass needs is nitrogen. So more than likely every year you are going to be having to fertilize with at least some nitrogen. Estimates I've heard is usually runs around anywhere from 4 to 6 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet as a rough estimate. But that, like I said, that really needs to be based off of your soil samples. So this shows the growth patterns. You know, especially for like cool season grasses, you'll see a lot of shoot growth in the spring and then some more in the fall. But what we're talking about usually for us is the warm season grasses where it's all during the summer. So that's when we're going to be fertilizing. So. Weeds. 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 Yeah, they grow everywhere, and there's all sorts of different kinds. But we're master gardeners. We look at it. A weed is nothing more than a plant growing where you don't want it. Unfortunately, most people don't want these growing in their yard. As a master gardener, we love dandelions because they help the bees. Some of the first flowers in springtime for the bees to handle. We've got two basic types of weeds. You've got annuals and perennials. Annual weeds come up every year. From a seed, they live their entire life cycle in 1 year. Perennial weeds are ones that actually regrow from the same rootstock year after year. A lot of the annual weeds are going to be the grass weeds, crabgrass, that sort of stuff. Perennial weeds a lot of times are going to be like the dandelions, where they've got a nice long tap root that they can regrow from. With your annuals, especially when you've got cool season annuals and then warm season annuals. All right. Wintertime is when they actually, for the cool season ones, will actually germinate in the middle of winter, and they'll be flush in the spring, go to seed and die out by the middle of summer usually. The summer ones will actually wait until springtime before they germinate, and then they'll run through the spring or through the summer and fall before they go to seed. So if we're looking at things like trying to deal with weed control, the best way to do weed control is to prevent the weed from going to seed in the first place. If we're going to do pre-emergence, we need to base it on what we actually need. So we need to do a pre-emergent in the fall and in the spring. Because if we do it in the fall, we catch all the cool season seeds before they go germinate, and then in spring we'll catch all the warm season annuals before they go to seed. The perennials are a lot harder to deal with. So when we're dealing with weeds, we've got two basic ways to do it. Do it as a pre-emergent or a post-emergent. Pre-emergent works best. That way we can kind of control what we're actually dealing with. Post-emergent, a lot of times, is going to end up with some sort of a spray or a chemical type thing to kill off the weeds once they've shown up in your yard. Or a lot of times mechanical will actually work, either pulling them or mowing them. A lot of these plants, they'll have some sort of a stalk that can come up with a flower head for the seeds. If you can cut it at that point, a lot of times they've spent all of their effort and energy putting in that seed head. If you can cut it before it matures, all the energy is expended in the plant a lot of times, and you can kill it off easily that way. The one big thing about post-emergent that you need to remember, if you're spraying a broadleaf weed killer to get rid of things like dandelions and stuff like that, a tree is a broadleaf weed, if you aren't thinking about it right. So if you're putting a lot of broadleaf weed killer onto your lawn and you've got a tree, some of that broadleaf weed killer is going to slowly seep into the ground and into the root system of your tree, and you can do serious damage to your tree if not kill it. So something to think about when you're doing that. This is also where mowing comes into effect. If you can mow and keep those weeds down, at least those that do have the seed head that pops up, you can keep those under control just by mowing on a regular basis. Pests. There are all sorts of different pests that you can show up in your yard. The big ones that we really have around here, I've got listed. Grubs. Grubs are basically the larval stage of a Japanese beetle. They come out, June bugs, a lot of people call them. They come out usually late May, early June. But when they get their younger stage, they're this nasty little white worm, and they eat the roots of all the grasses and any plants that you have. Can be very destructive. There are very good treatments that you can get that are specifically targeted for this species, so it's not a big problem to go ahead and put in some pest control or insecticide for these. Because nobody really likes the grubs when they come out of the ground because they're all nasty, and nobody likes the Japanese beetles because once they emerge, they will just devastate your crops, and especially roses. They really like roses, I've found. Grasshoppers, especially if you live further out of town, grasshoppers can be a major issue. Not last year, but the year before, we had grasshoppers on our property so bad. We had a beautiful rose bush one day. Literally the next day we had the rose on top. There wasn't a leaf one left on it. And there are some chemicals that you can do that are actually specifically targeted for grasshoppers. My personal preference, which you can't do in town, is turkeys. I had very good Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago because they wiped out every grasshopper on my property in the space of about a week and a half. So natural predators work really well for things like grasshoppers. Army worms can be really nasty. What they'll do is they're a larval stage of a moth. They'll come in and you'll get hundreds of them on an area, and they will just strip bare a section of grass if they end up in the grass. They'll do a lot of damage to your vegetable crops too, I've also found. So there's also chemical means to control those also. Things like moles and voles are a little bit harder to control. You're usually going to either have to trap those or poison them, unless you have something like a cat that is really good at catching them. The one thing to think about, if you're doing poison, any poison that you use will transfer to any of the critters that might run across it. So if a mole or vole crawls out of the hole and dies, because of the poison you've given it, and a cat runs across it, it will poison the cat. If a snake eats it, it'll poison the snake. And I can tell you the poisons that they use to kill a lot of the rodents is very, very nasty. It basically eats away at their blood vessels and they bleed to death from the inside. It's nasty. But it does a very good job at killing them off a lot of times. One thing I will recommend, if you do have extra questions that I cannot answer, aggieturf.tamu.edu is the official website for Aggie's, or Texas A&M Horticulture's research facility on turf. has a huge amount of information. It's a very good site to actually get onto. So, any questions? All right. I thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, contact the Extension office, and they can get in touch with the Master Gardeners, and we'll try and answer your questions. Thank you.